Hello, comrades, compadres, amigos. I'm Kollektiv, as I am known on TikTok, and today I'm going to be taking the SappyValues Political Compass Test, and we're going to test my political values, and we'll see how it goes. So I'm going to do the shuffled version. The first question is, only the government can fairly and effectively regulate organizations. Usually, the government is the only entity that I would think of that can regulate organizations, so strongly agree. A government that provides for everyone is inherently a good idea. Yes, of course. Victimless crimes should still be punished. It depends, in my opinion, on what the crime is, but generally you need order and stability in a society, so I would strongly agree with this. Class is the primary division of society. Yes, absolutely. Through all forms of uh, society, in my opinion, the primary driver of conflict and division has been class struggle. Class struggle creates material conditions, and that's what leads to a people either rising up or staying submissive. Strongly agree. The government should be less involved in the day-to-day life of its citizens. No, of course not. The government absolutely needs to be involved in the daily life of citizens because otherwise we wouldn't have things like roads, schools, hospitals, and police. The harder you work, the more you progress up the social ladder. It depends on where you live, but here in America, that is absolutely not true. Hard work does not get you anywhere near where it used to these days because the capitalists have been merging their interests and their actions together, and they have been suppressing the workers for decades. Their ability to provide for their families and to generally prosper has been very hampered by capitalism, especially uh, Reaganist neoliberalism. So, definitely disagree. Taxation of the wealthy is a bad idea. Society would be better off without it. No, absolutely not. Taxation is absolutely necessary in modern society when talking about the wealthy because uh, if you let a few individuals uh, amass insane amounts of wealth incomprehensible to the bottom 90%, then that can lead to people buying their way into power. Just look at Trump. So, strongly disagree. Animals deserve certain universal rights. Absolutely. They are living things, and we need to prevent mistreatment and abuse. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, is to guarantee them universal rights. One cannot be moral without religion. I am a proud Christian, but you don't need to be religious to be moral. There are lots of moral atheists. Moral code is a form of societal structure to keep society in order and functioning. Because otherwise, society would descend into chaos, and people, if we didn't have moral code, would be much more commonly hurting other people and individuals. So, and there have been secular societies where moral code obviously is still enforced because that's how society is able to retain any order and function. So, disagree. transgender individuals should not be able to adopt children. I strongly disagree with that. I think anybody, if you're qualified, should be able to adopt children. Transgender individuals should not be disqualified from this. Parents should hold absolute power over their children as they are older and more experienced. Disagree, that leads to abuse. Generally, it's not a good idea because children are not property, they are human beings. Strength is necessary for any government to succeed. Well, there have been some libertarian societies that have functioned pretty well, but and there's a lot of strong governments that also fail to function well often. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure because there are successful strong governments and successful libertarian governments. I think I'm going to agree with this because if you didn't have a strong government, then there wouldn't be any societal order. Well, not no societal order, but very reduced societal order. The current welfare system should be expanded to further combat inequality. Absolutely. No person should be left behind in society because uh, of their circumstances of what they did in the past. Um, and generally, the government is meant to serve the people, so it needs to do everything in its power to ensure that society does not ignore the disadvantaged. The death penalty should exist for certain crimes. In theory, I would strongly disagree with this because then that gives more authority to the government and more discretion for who it can get rid of and silence. Generally, it gives the state more authority. However, there's lots of criminals doing heinous crimes and not conforming to society's moral code, and they do things which I believe can't be redeemed. So I strongly agree in practice. The police were not created to protect the people, but to uphold the status quo by force. It depends. In Eastern societies, this is mostly true. The police usually serve the people in socialist Eastern societies. In Western societies, the police often serve government and elite interests. So, since I'm a good old Yankee here, I'm going to agree with this. Usually, the police serve higher interests, not the people. That's why there's this culture amongst civilians in the United States of police being, uh, civilians being scared of police presence and being fearful. Sometimes it is right that the government may spy on its citizens to combat extremists and terrorists. I think the government should have as little power, preferably as possible, over individuals. However, um, sometimes spying is necessary in order to prevent acts of societal terror, but I absolutely am willing to draw the line at mass societal surveillance. That is a violation of human rights. So I'm going to slightly agree with this. It is human nature to be greedy. No, absolutely not. I believe that human greediness is taught. Exploitation is an outdated term as the struggles of 1800s capitalism doesn't exist anymore. No, I strongly disagree with this. Exploitation absolutely still exists, especially in 1800s capitalist form in African countries, in Latin American countries. There are absolutely still forms of exploitation in those countries. There are more slaves than ever, in fact, in the world. And even in countries where chattel slave labor isn't occurring as frequently, uh, workers are still being exploited by capitalists because workers tend to receive wages, and wages do not reflect the total surplus value which workers produce. So, I strongly disagree with this. Charity is a better way of helping those in need than social welfare. We wouldn't need social welfare if people were more charitable than they were now. Ideally, this would be true. However, it is a much safer bet to um, encourage government subsidies and welfare programs in order to take care of society, especially those who have been historically disadvantaged. So I'm going to strongly disagree with this. State schools are a bad idea because our state shouldn't be influencing our children. Ideally, ideally, I would believe this is true. However, if you look, there are a lot of incompetent private institutions which are also pushing agendas, and I would rather the state be able to teach the children rather than private institutions or parents. So I disagree with this strongly. Without democracy, a society is nothing. This isn't inherently true, but your society is absolutely reduced if you do not have democratic input. Democratic input, though, is often debatable as to what exactly that means and how it should be implemented. So, I am going to strongly agree with this. Authority figures, if morally correct, are a good thing for society. Ideally, I believe this is true. Um, the only issue I have with this statement is that it's mostly subjective outside of objective reality. It's mostly subjective as to what morally correct means, because that means different things to different people. But I would still strongly agree with this. All industry and the bank should be nationalized. I don't think all industry should be nationalized, but I think a vast majority of it should be nationalized. And I think banks should absolutely be nationalized, um, because the state needs to maintain control over production, I believe, and workplaces to properly execute the duties that it is given by the people and to serve the overall good of society. So I strongly agree with this. And now, the next question, 24. I believe we're about halfway done. Nudism is perfectly natural. I would believe so. I believe it's a form of expression. However, obviously, you shouldn't be indecent in public, so I'm going to slightly agree with that. Jury nullification should be legal. So, if I understand this correctly, jury nullification is the concept of the jury choosing a sentence for a suspect contrary to what the law would normally prescribe a sentence, uh, well, a guilty or not guilty verdict, uh, on the basis that they believe that the law is incorrect. And this sounds good, but I believe it could lead to bias and it would let certain criminals go. So I'm going to strongly disagree with this. An individual's body is their own property, and they should be able to do anything they desire to it. I believe that most things you do to your body are a form of expression. However, I don't believe you should be able to do things which harm yourself, like doing illicit substances or generally out of line things. So I'm going to disagree with this slightly. Mandatory ID should be used to ensure public safety. Yeah, we already have that. I agree. Gender is a social construct, not a natural state of affairs. I personally believe it could be both, but that's why we also have the difference between biological sex and gender identity. So I'm going to agree with this. Autonomy of the body extends even to minors, the mentally ill, and serious criminals. This is, I believe it's true, because those are all people. They all deserve their own rights. I think if you have a tendency to harm yourself, I believe you should be monitored, but I would generally believe that this is true. Laws based on cultural values rather than ethical ones aren't justice. Yes, I absolutely agree with this. This is like, for example, how conservative states in the United States enforce abortion restriction laws on the basis of religion. Obviously, not everybody is religious, not everybody is Christian, so it would be immoral to enforce religious morality laws. So the next question is, economic inequality is too high in the world. Absolutely, absolutely. We have in the United States 1% of the American population controls 31% of all the wealth. The top 10% control over 80% of stocks. This is absolutely true. I strongly agree with this. It's because, like I said before, history is driven by class conflict, and that class conflict has led to the most powerful accumulating the most wealth and purchasing further power. I strongly agree with this. The government should at most provide emergency services and law enforcement. So, the language of this question is tricky. It's saying at most, meaning that this is the most stuff it should do. Basically, this is a libertarian centered question. And I strongly disagree with that because the government should do much more than that. Wages are always fair, and employers know what a worker's labor is worth. Absolutely not. I strongly disagree with this. Uh, a worker's worth is inherently the amount of surplus value that they produce. And in the capitalist society, surplus value is always being funneled from the worker to the capitalist. So, no, I strongly disagree with this. It gives leverage to unelected capitalists on how to pay their workers instead of workers dictating their compensation. The smaller the government, the freer the people. I think this generally sometimes can be true, but most of the time it's big government that actually saves people from oppression. Like, for example, in the 1930s, when FDR became president, it was his expansion of government power that saved the workers from capitalist exploitation, which had been ongoing ever since the United States has been founded, and worsened in the 1890s. So, I would disagree with this. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. I strongly disagree with this, and when it comes to talking about government overreach, you should always fear the government because if your people do not control your government, then that has this centralized power which is disconnected from popular support and control. So if your government is acting outside of its duties, generally, if it's conducting mass surveillance and societal totalitarianism and control, you should absolutely have a reason to fear your government, because totalitarian government is always looking for uh, counter-revolutionaries and anti-statists to suppress. So I strongly disagree with this. In times of crisis, safety becomes more important than civil liberties. I believe to an extent that this is true. However, it's very, very important, I believe, to ensure that you do not allow your government to use safety and societal cohesion and order as an excuse to expand its power. So I would partially agree with this. Organizations and corporations cannot be trusted and need to be regulated by the government. Absolutely. Absolutely. When corporations were left unregulated or minimally regulated, for example, the Chiquita Banana Company, when it was called the United Fruit Organization, I believe, in Guatemala, they basically overthrew the Guatemalan government because they refused to pay a higher tax rate on their lands. Next question. Multiculturalism is bad. I disagree. I believe multiculturalism can promote the sharing of ideas, and it can bring people across the globe together. So, I strongly disagree. Society requires structure and bureaucracy in order to function. I believe society inherently requires structure. It does not require bureaucracy. Those two things don't need to be attached to each other. Well, if we're talking about bureaucracy in the form of like inefficiencies and slow government, essentially. So I'm going to partially agree with this. Land should not be a commodity to be bought and sold. I strongly I strongly agree with this because um, the primary purpose of holding lands is usually to do something with it or to protect it, to protect natural environments. The only reason I believe a person should be able to hold land is to own a home, to own means of production which they will use to satisfy the requirements or living needs in their own life, or um, generally, that's it, basically. Uh, the government should own land to protect it, to protect natural environments, and to conserve it. And I think workers should collectively own land, uh, which serves as their workplace and as the means of production. So I strongly agree with this. Communism is an ideal that can never work in practice. I Well, if we're going by the old Marxist definition, a global society without currency, uh, without hierarchy, without classes, I believe that's very utopian. I'm not sure if it's possible, but generally you can have an egalitarian society. It's worked in the past. So I'm going to click agree. I'm a little skeptical of the wording of that question, though. And generally, that also comes down to whether I would consider myself just a socialist or a communist, which I'm also currently unsure of. A person should be able to worship whomever or whatever they want. Generally, I agree with this, even if I strongly disagree with whatever it is that they worship. Drugs are harmful and should be banned. Absolutely. Absolutely. We should not do any of that drug decriminalizing nonsense. The government needs to maintain strict control over drugs, in my opinion. We've normalized drug culture way too much in our society, especially in our culture. It's infiltrated our art and our music and our movies and shows. Absolutely. We need to regulate that. Homosexuality is against my values. I disagree with that. Um, People should be able to live however they want, even if that's not how I would live my own life. Freedom of business is the best way, practical way a society can prosper. If we're talking about bourgeois capitalism and individuals owning large swaths of land and large collections of the means of production, I strongly disagree with this. Two consenting individuals should be able to do whatever they want with each other, even if it makes me uncomfortable. It depends. If they're hurting each other, they shouldn't be allowed to do it. If it's an expression of love that they are performing, they should be allowed to do it. Did you complete this test in a serious manner? Yes. Get me to the results. Okay. So I am moderately progressive, you could say. I'm moderately authoritarian, according to SappyValues. And I'm basically on the far left. I usually I consider myself libertarian. However, I believe the reason why I got authoritarianism is because I believe my personal philosophy about politics is that the government should have as much authority as the people have control over the government. So I believe government authority is okay and necessary, but as long as the people have strong control over their government. Otherwise, generally, I would consider myself a libertarian, but that's usually the law with political compass tests. They are subjective. You may get different results. So that was fun taking this test. Have a good day, comrades. Kollektiv out.